So, my name is Dr. Johannes Atela. I'm the Executive Director of the Africa Research and Impact Network, and also the PI, or the project lead for the Artificial Intelligence for Climate Resilient project working in Africa. Within the Africa Research and Impact Network, we are passionate about supporting evidence research that supports decisions on some of the challenges that Africa faces, such as climate change. So we have a network of close to 400 research fellows. 30% of these are policymakers, because we believe that research should link to policy. And we are spread across 41 African countries. Our remit is basically to really understand what works and what does not work for local, especially the grassroots communities, so that the voices of these grassroots communities can be properly packaged and can be properly organized and communicated to the broader or the bigger level policy decisions and investment opportunities. So as ARIN, we implement a number of projects across various thematic areas. One of our areas that we focus on is what we call local climate action and sustainable solutions. So this is where we try to really work, try to understand and support local communities with climate, planning for resilience, and planning for various development aspects based on evidence. We have another area which is called, inclusive climate and health solutions. As you are aware that climate change affects the health systems of African countries, and this is critical because health is the primary enabler for development. A healthy community can drive development. A sick and unhealthy community means a failure in development and cannot guarantee the future. So the role of climate change in health is very critical, and in our work around this, we try to work or bring different stakeholders together, both from the climate change space, but also from the health space, so that they can basically work together to co-create integrated solutions that are inclusive of everybody, of every aspiration, and particularly the local vulnerable communities whose primary health systems are ravaged or affected the most by the impacts of climate change. The other area we work on is resilient cities, and in this we try to support, urban poor work in terms of planning and proactive disaster risk response, as we know that urbanization in Africa is becoming a very, very critical agenda in the current situation. About 70% of Africans in the next 30 years are expected to be in urban areas. And at the same time, we see a proliferation of slums or informal settlements with a lot of exposure to disasters such as floods, fire, and all that. So we try to work with these communities and local governments across Africa to be able to design preparedness plans in ways that could support these urban poor to be more proactive in terms of responding, or be more prepared in terms of responding to the risks that they face, and be able to move away from reactive approaches and emergency approaches that are expensive and sometimes really detrimental in terms of the impacts that are already experienced. Finally, we work on the part of emerging technologies, the role of technologies in sorting or solving our problems, whether climate change, whether health, whether disaster risks reduction, whether food security, is very critical. So we are aware that there are several innovations and technologies that are coming into the African space to help in supporting response or supporting providing solutions to the challenges and the development aspirations that Africa face. So one of those technologies is the artificial intelligence, which you are aware that is a critical part of the conversation at the moment in many workspaces. And therefore, we are interested in ensuring that we sort of engage with these technologies and inform the African stakeholders on ways in which these technologies can be supportive in their pursuit for solutions, developmental solutions. So in that sense, we also undertake capacity building, and most importantly, we also undertake a sort of policy support for different policymakers across these areas that I have mentioned. Now, coming to the project, the AI for Climate Resilience project, I want to highlight that you and me are aware that climate change currently is the biggest challenge that the globe faces. And Africa actually has been highlighted by the latest IPCC report to be the most affected by the impacts of climate change, despite the continent's minimal contribution to the climate change phenomenon. So this is not a new story. This has been there, for a while. And we are aware that the global community has put in place, policy frameworks that can help to respond to the impacts of climate change. The response mechanism can either be through mitigation or through adaptation. For Africa, adaptation is critical because the continent, especially the vulnerable communities, the farmers, the pastoralists, the small-scale traders, the women business people, are already facing very, very strong impacts of climate change. And therefore, adaptation to these impacts is a priority to the continent. This explains why the continent, in its policy agenda, we know that countries currently have prepared what we call the NDCs, which is the nationally determined contribution, which are the policy frameworks within which countries really respond, or countries contribute to the global efforts towards addressing climate change. So these NDCs, each country out in Africa have prepared today. About 90% of African countries have prepared the NDCs, or the nationally determined contribution. And alongside these NDCs, countries have also prepared what we call the national adaptation plans. And this is because, as I've said, Africa prioritizes adaptation in ways that could help to resolve the already impacts that are already being experienced in that sense. So this policy agenda prioritizes or puts adaptation as the main actions that African countries need to pursue. In that sense, adaptation itself is a multifaceted, agenda. It has a number of perspectives that needs to be considered. Today, we see a situation whereby, despite the fact that for many years there has been investment in adaptation interventions within Africa, but these investments still, it is not very clear whether these investments are really leading to enhanced resilience of the local communities, especially the vulnerable ones, to the impacts of climate change. And therefore, in terms of thinking about transforming the adaptation agenda for Africa, the role of emerging technologies is becoming very important. So artificial intelligence has been discussed, has been talked about in Africa in various forums as an opportunity that Africa can use to really respond to its pressing challenges, and particularly climate change. So within the work that we do as part of artificial intelligence, we want to make the conversation not just about the concept of artificial intelligence, but also about how the artificial intelligence can be applied to provide solutions, especially in the climate change space, where we are passionate about building resilience of local communities. You and me are aware that African communities, African governments have struggled with a number of aspects when it comes to resilience, aspects to do with understanding, what are some of the climate risks or the impacts that really different communities or different groups within the communities are facing. What are some of the interventions or adaptation interventions that can be put in place to be able to respond to these particular impacts? And most importantly, the aspect of reporting in ways that really shows whether we are making progress or not. These are issues that African governments in their implementation of NDCs and adaptation plans have struggled with. Now, we have artificial intelligence that has come in the space. So the question is, how do we connect the opportunity with some of these challenges that African countries are facing with regards to building resilience? So within this program of artificial intelligence for climate resilience, we aim to build capacity. We aim to, sensitize a wide range of stakeholders, especially researchers and policymakers, on how they can use artificial intelligence to build or to make decisions around resilience, especially for local communities. The program is organized in such a way that we try to target the most important needs of our stakeholders, both governments and non-governmental organizations. So the first part of the program is really to help us understand how the climate change aspect is connected to artificial intelligence, which I've explained. But also we want to, inform or sort of train the fellows who are part of this program. As I said, we have about 100 fellows who are currently undertaking the program. We want to train them on ways in which they can use artificial intelligence to undertake vulnerability and risk analysis for different groups within the communities. And finally, once we understand that, we also want to train them to be able to understand how they can then use artificial intelligence to make decisions in terms of, creating a decision support system that can enable both government and non-governmental actors to make choices in terms of what interventions fit where and what results are expected from these particular interventions, and how can those results be connected or be linked to investment opportunities. And finally, most African countries have to report on their progress on adaptation. And this reporting is part of the requirements under the Paris Agreement. The role of artificial intelligence in galvanizing and consolidating resilience information from across different contexts, from across different groups and experiences is very critical. And therefore, we hope that we can support the capacity of the fellows who are part of this program to be able to understand how they can use artificial intelligence to be able to galvanize, aggregate, synthesize, and report on the progress of climate resilience within the continent, and also to show gaps that needs to be covered, so that the agenda around adaptation in Africa is not static, but is progressive, building on some of the gains and the opportunities that the continent is already facing. With those very few remarks, I want to urge all our fellows and everyone within the adaptation ecosystem within Africa to engage with this initiative. This is one of its kind initiative that is really going to move from just talking about a technology into how to use that technology to help us resolve the challenges that we face. And I do hope that you are going to enjoy the training and the modules that are presented in the initiative. Thank you.